our new business and employability title. Before we start though, I'd like to ask you just a quick question. Could you use the chat box, please, and tell me how well do you know Business Partner, the course already? Are you A, already using it? B, befriending it, so maybe you've looked at some materials and you're here to find out a bit more, or yep, C, curious, maybe you've heard the name but I haven't really looked at it at all. So we've got a couple of A's, lots of B's and some C's. Okay, fabulous, thank you very much. That just gives me a sense of kind of how much detail to go into. One more question. What kind of classes do you teach? Are you A, academic, so teaching in a university or equivalent? Are you B, business focused but in a language school, a PLS, so adults come into your classroom? Are you C, in company, so you go out to the business? Or D, dedicated to specific students, so one-to-one? Okay, a lot of in company, a lot of one-to-one, some academics at universities. Okay, so again, a bit of a mix. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. So today, what are we going to be looking at? It's really more of a menu than an agenda, because I wanted to find out kind of where you were with these two questions first. These are the sorts of things that we're going to talk about. We can focus on some more than others, depending on what you're interested in. So Business Partner, what is it? ESAP, so our online methodology, what is that? We can look at teaching an online lesson with Business Partner. We can, if you want to, spend a little bit of time looking at the specific resources that come with the course. And then if there's anything else that you'd like to know, we can do that too. Can I ask you just to send me a little message. What are you interested in today? Where shall I spend most of the time? On the course, on the methodology, on how we teach a lesson online, or on the kind of details of what you find there, where in the course? Okay, a little bit of everything. So be it. But the online lesson, what is it? The ESAP teaching, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for that. So I think we'll do a little bit of everything and we'll focus on the online lesson. Perfect. Okay, so what is Business Partner? We'll talk about this a little bit. It's our new business English course. It's designed to teach English, but alongside that to develop learners' business skills and help them become employable. There are 8 levels in total. So we go from A1 through to C1, and each level could take sort of 60 to 90 hours, depending on how much you choose to use, because it's flexible, it's modular. So it's really easy to adapt to different teaching contexts and course lengths and student needs. There's authentic content all the way along from major business brands like the Financial Times, and then also ITN and the BBC, so kind of consumer brands. And finally, there's an exclusive Swiss version with special content for the region, but we can talk about that a little bit later. The material has been written to be accessible for pre-work students, so students just preparing to go into the workplace, but it's also in-depth enough to be relevant and useful for professionals who are already well into their careers. So let's talk about some of these things in more detail. 8 levels, that's more than any business course that we've had in the past, but each level has fewer units. So we hear more and more, actually in all contexts, not just business, that, that teachers struggle to get to the end of a book. And then the students get upset because they're not using all of the course they paid for, blah, 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 blah. So we've reduced each level to 8 units per level. Obviously, the lessons will teach language. So, you know, the grammar, the vocabulary that's suitable for the level. But there's a big emphasis on soft skills. So the communication skills of the 21st century well, Dachel, yeah, the 21st century skills, and on business skills. So that's things like giving presentations and managing meetings, this kind of thing. Does anyone want to, I like this visual that I've put on the slide here. It's just directly from one of the levels of business partner. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to what the topic is here? In the chat box, why have we got a big burger? What do you reckon we might have in a business context? Dinner, yeah, the business of dinner. It's actually an image. Oh, no, it didn't click forward, did it? It's tailored to your taste. Oh, very nice management. Oh, there's some great suggestions. This is actually talking about the feedback sandwich. So how to give feedback in a structured and diplomatic way. So that's just a small extract from the course. So communication skills in Business Partner are taught through video-based lessons. Every unit, has 2 videos. So the communication skills video has a scripted storyline that illustrates specific skills and helps students think through ways to act and ways to react and deal with situations. So it's split into 4 sections. There's a setup that establishes a situation and kind of gives 2 different ways to deal with it. Option A and option B. So there's 2 different continuations of the videos. So students can see how different ways of being or playing a situation could play out. And then the video wraps up with some analysis and tips, either from one of the authors or from, like in this case, an external expert. So rather than it just being one thing, it's really looking at alternative ways that you could play a situation. And so I said there's 2 videos in each unit. The communication ones we've just talked about, and then there are real videos from ITN or from the BBC. These are generally presented as news items with an ITN reporter as the news anchor, and then there's authentic material that illustrates real life business environments around the world. You'll find native speakers of different Englishes as well as a lot of native speakers. What else is good about Business Partner? Well, there's a short writing lesson in every unit that includes a model answer for students to look at before they write, and then another model answer to compare their answers to after. And not every business book has a focus on writing, so this is something worth mentioning, I think. And then finally, something I wanted to mention was the business workshops at the end of each lesson. So these give students the opportunity to work on realistic case studies, and they'll bring together whatever they've worked on in the unit. Okay, so I mentioned flexible. That's in terms of content and also in terms of delivery. So if we look at content first, apart from the A1 and A2 levels where students really do need to build the language blocks and the language is super carefully recycled, but in all other levels, so A2 plus upwards, the units and the lessons within the units can be done in any order. Slide has a spelling mistake. Oh dear, I'll go back and find that. Thank you. In terms of flexibility of delivery, it's easy to adapt Business Partner for in class, for online, for group, or for one-to-one, or any combination of these. Of course, there are print versions, but there are also digital in the forms of interactive ebooks for the course book, and then the interactive workbook on My English Lab. And that's also where students will find all of their digital resources. If I move that out my way. Yeah, on the My English Lab, which looks like this. I didn't turn my pointer on. I thought I did. Ah, there we go, My English Lab, good. And then for teachers, again, there's a print teacher's book, but really everything you need is online, available through the portal. That's where you'll find the presentation tool and all of the teacher's resources. And you'll also find our new tools. So you've just been hearing about the test generator, and there's Zoom integration. And it's also where you'll find the link to the My English Lab. And you can see all of the things that the students do, and you can also check the gradebook for the whole class. You've got access to the tests and a ton of resources there. Okay, so we've talked about Business Partner and what is it. So now let's talk a little bit about ESAP and online classes. So what is ESAP? It's a methodology. We're going to go on a little history wander now. So in the 70s, we had a PPP, Presentation Practice Production, and that became standard in classrooms from 1970s or so. And then in the 90s, we got this, ESA, ESA. You've probably spotted that that's extremely similar to what we're talking about today, ESAP. Yes, well done. So I've added a picture of this person. Do you know who this is?
Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn! Brilliant. It's a Jeremy, but it's Jeremy Harmer. So Jeremy Harmer is the author of oh, my clicker isn't working. There we go. The Practice of English Language Teaching. This is the 5th edition, the image here. The original was like way back in 1989, and this was the first cover that we had. But in his section on methodology, he described the sequence of ESA, engage, study, practice, engage, study, activate. And at the time, the PPP was considered too prescriptive, too teacher-centered, and it was almost revelatory to say, well, you know, before the first P, present, maybe we could engage our students. Maybe we don't just jump in with, right, class, let's learn the present perfect. Here's the form, the structure, had plus past participle, no, have plus past participle, I think it's a present perfect. But rather than just jumping straight in with form and practice, you might ask them questions. So, you know, before I came to class today, I had already taught 3 other classes and mowed the lawn and I don't know, cooked lunch for 50 people. I don't know why it would be 50, but regardless. What about you? What had you already done before you came here or logged on today? So by sort of asking students questions about themselves and in the format, it allows you to see what they already know and taps into their existing knowledge of the scheme, of the topic, of the theme, of the schema, if you like, of the language as well, ideas around it, and any vocabulary that they already have. So this is now absolutely standard in face-to-face class. And ESAP takes this as its basis. There are 2 main differences though. The first is, well, the letter P. And the second is that we've taken online teaching into consideration. So taking a well-known methodology for face-to-face teaching and then just adjusting it slightly for online. So really what we're going to talk about is taking what you do in a face-to-face class and making it work effectively online. So the 4 phases of ESAP. First is engage. So asking students to retrieve previous knowledge and engage personally with the topic, and also checking what the students already know. So connecting personally, you can ask students how they're doing at the start of class and ask them to just pop their answer in the chat box and then have individual students expand their answer. That's fine, that works nicely. Yeah, you could also have them mime how they're feeling or ask them what's the best thing they've done since the last lesson. You can comment on things that you can see in the background. Some way of connecting personally with students as they arrive. I'm sure you've all got loads of great ideas because you know, people have been teaching online for quite a while now. So if there's anything you want to suggest, please feel free to add it in the chat box for the other participants. Maybe you've got a great idea that people can try out. So that's connecting personally with students. And then when it comes to the lesson content, you can use the chat box for retrieval practice. So to remember what they've learned in the last lesson. You might have a student define a word and the others have to guess it using the chat box. You might use the private messaging function. So you could ask your students something like, what's your favorite way to relax, perhaps? And then they have to send the message to you privately. So on the chat box, you've got the to, and you can send it to everyone. That's lovely, Monique. A bit of music and ask them how it made them feel. Yeah, so in the chat box, now I can't share the chat box vision with you over Zoom annoyingly, but you've got the option to change it from messaging everyone, a little drop down menu, and you can have it only message the host, i.e. you, the teacher. So if you ask them just to send you privately the answer, then you can read out one or two and the students have to guess who said it. That's quite a fun activity you can do with lots of topics. Obviously, it works best with smaller classes, people who know each other well. And then in terms of preparing for today's lesson, so trying to activate knowledge of what we're going on to talk about, you want to see what they already know. So if the lesson's going to be about emotions, you could just ask them to add any emotion adjectives they know in the chat box. That's fairly simple. We've got a good suggestion here. Oh, no, this is about using my English Lab, sorry. Yeah, so if we're doing a lesson on emotions and you want to activate, see what the students know already, you can simply ask them to type their adjectives that they know in the chat box. Fine, that's good, that works. But you know, there are other ways to do it and ways to do things a little bit differently to mix it up a bit. So you could say, all right, emotions, we've got happy, we've got sad, we've got angry. What other words do you know? You're going to have 10 seconds to think and type them in the chat box, but don't send them until I say to. So then you would count 10 seconds while the students are typing. And then you, after 3, you say, okay, 3, 2, 1, send. And that means that everybody's sending at the same time. You're asking everyone in the class to engage and think individually. And everybody has to do some work. And then you get a better sense of where the whole class is. Sorry. So another idea then is taking a keyword from the theme, so it might be feeling, and then you write it down the side of the whiteboard or the screen, and then elicit words to go with that for each letter. So words to do with emotion here for feeling. So F, okay, we want a feeling word that begins with F. What can we think of? So you might have them type in the chat box. I'm hoping someone's going to type an emotion word that begins with F in the chat box. But you might have frustrated, there we go, or frightened, or fabulous, or fearful, excellent. And then you would move on to the next letter. E for is the next letter in feeling. And so you might come up with, oh, fickle, what's a great word. You might have excited, or emotional, or euphoric, or eager, or yes, wonderful, and so on and so on and so on until you get to the end. So activating prior knowledge about the topic we're going to go on to. I'm sure there are hundreds of things that you've done around this as well. But one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, something like that 3-2-1 activity, it's great to try and get all of the students thinking at the same time, rather than just relying on, you know, the 2 or 3 who always answer. So we've talked about a personal connection, about trying to have some sort of retrieval practice based on the last class, and then activating prior knowledge. So the next one is S for study. This is where we'd have the lesson input, so the meat of the lesson. In PPP, this would be the presentation and the practice phases. Of course, it doesn't really have to be a presentation. You could use a discovery technique or something, a different type. I'm just looking at, there's a great suggestion here from Monique. In a business group, I love having the students look at abstract art and ask them what they make it think about for a minute. Is it positive, negative, in the context of a theme? Yeah, that's really nice. Lovely. So on to the study phase. Here, you're probably going to be using screen share in your online lessons. So maybe sharing a PowerPoint or the presentation tool if you're using a Pearson course. But you probably don't want to have the screen share on the whole time. So there's lots of points in a lesson where you want all of the students to be able to see each other and to engage. And if they're going to engage, then it really helps if they can see each other. So unless they all have a multiple screen, then that's really hard with the screen share on. Now, obviously, this is a case of do as I say and not as I do, because I'm leaving my presentation on the whole time. But it's very beneficial if you can unshare and have all cameras on for a time. The next point, if I can get this to work, is avoiding TTT. So we heard about we just heard TTT mentioned as a good thing in your teacher staff room online groups or SIGs. But here, of course, in the classroom, TTT is something we tend to try to keep low. So in a face-to-face class, it's good practice to avoid teacher talking time as far as possible. But it becomes even more of a challenge online. So long periods where the teacher is simply talking is probably long periods where the students are inactive. Again, this is a webinar. It's somewhat different, so I am just talking, but there we are. So having a variety of task types is important to keep students engaged and trying to keep all of the students as engaged as possible all of the way through. So as in you might ask students to participate regularly, but if one student's talking, then what is everybody else doing? So it's really useful to have a specific task for listening students in face-to-face, but arguably more so online. So while one student's talking, the others can be writing in the chat box. Do they agree or disagree? Did they have a similar or a different answer? Can they add anything else? Or using that 3-2-1 approach that we talked about before. So trying to vary the pace, trying to keep all students active at the same time. And then giving students time to think. So online, there's always a little bit of a lag between sort of asking something and a response coming. There is in the face-to-face classroom as well, but I think it's worse online, or it's exacerbated online. I think we always feel pressured as teachers in any scenario to fill the silence. So you ask a student questions and then just jump in, or go to the student that you know will have the answer without really giving the class the time to think about it. Apparently teachers often tend to give the best students more time to think and the slowest students the least time to think, because they trust that there will be an answer forthcoming eventually. So just something to think about. Make sure you do allow the students time to come up with an answer. And finally, feedback is very important. So you can use the whiteboard for whole class feedback, and then the chat box can do whole class or individual feedback. The chat box is amazing. And in the same way that we talked about using that little to buttons so that students can send you private messages. You can also use that to send specific students individual feedback. Or prompts. You can also use it to send them prompts. So if you've got a weaker student who you think maybe needs a little bit of extra support, then you can maybe send a sentence beginning and have them complete it. So the chat box is an amazing tool and actually gives you more opportunities to support students in different ways, arguably, than a face-to-face class. Great. I think I am talking a lot, so let's move on. So that was S for study. Then we've got A for activate. So freer production. And this is where we'd want to use breakout rooms in an online class. In a face-to-face class, giving clear instructions is really important if you don't want to spend the next 50 minutes explaining the task to everyone individually. But this is even more important online. If you think about it, in a face-to-face class, you give a task and you can kind of look around and see everyone at once. And it's kind of obvious if they're not doing what you've asked them to do. But in an online class with breakout rooms, you have to go into each one before you know if they're on task or not. So it's really important to make sure your instructions are super clear. If you want students to actually have something to say, it also helps to make the tasks as personal as possible. And since this is freer practice now in the A for Activate area, if you want them to use the new language or the new skills that we've been teaching, it helps to encourage this and to encourage personalization. One idea is to group students in threes instead of pairs. And so you have the two students do the pair work task, and then the third person is a listener working with like a list of the new phrases or the key words or a technique to look for, it could be. And they just tick the number of times they hear it. So it means that the participating students know that there's an incentive to use the new language and to really activate it, rather than either being silent or quick or just using the old language that they already knew. Obviously, if you use this having a listening student, then you'd need to run the task again so that the listening student has a chance to participate. Excuse me. So you do need to allow a little more time, but it's definitely worth it. Okie dokie, so P for practice. So this is the stage that we've added in from the original ESA. It's the stage that the students do after the lesson. So you could call it homework, really. We're calling it practice, and we're talking about practice in an online environment. So that's interactive online activities where students can do the activities themselves and get feedback. So scoring is automatic, and the work that students do get reported, and so there's a record of it, a grade book. Students can see what they've done, so can the teacher, and the teacher can look at students' performance in these activities. So then the idea is that the teacher, having looked at the student's performance, can use that data in their up and coming class. Sorry, instant feedback for students. Yeah, here we go. So they can use this information in the next class, and they can look at what do students do well and what do they need more practice of. And finally, this obviously saves time on marking. It means that you don't have to spend time marking their homework in the first 15 minutes of the next class. Okay, so we have talked how we're doing for time. That's great. We've talked about ESAP, we've talked about business partner. Let's look at how we might put all of this together in a lesson. So we're going to put it into practice with a lesson from business partner, or the first half of a lesson. This is a lesson from the B1 plus level. It's Unit 4, Lesson 1. The first lesson in each of the units with business partner is the one that includes the real world business videos, so the authentic business videos from the BBC or ITN. And it has a focus on vocabulary. And then it ends up in a project, as you can see down here. So that's the kind of general flow. The topic for this lesson is, the topic for the unit as a whole is business strategy. And then the subtopic for this lesson is food industry strategies. So the students are going to be learning and using vocabulary related to business and business strategy. So how are we going to convert this to an online class? Well, the lesson starts as soon as the first student joins your class. And we can use this time to engage unit learners and show interest, that personal connection we were talking about. So we could just chat, you know, how was your day? That's a nice talk, whatever. You could just chat, but to really make the most of the time, it's great to have a prepared question. So this topic, if you remember, was about the food industry. So what I'm trying to do here would be to engage learners, show interest in them, encourage interaction between the learners, and kind of set the tone for the lesson. The task I'd have here would be to answer the question in the chat box and respond to each other's answers. So I'm asking them, what was the last thing you ate? And then there's some follow-up questions. I would imagine that I'll get a mixture of, well, I mean, why not? Please answer in the chat box, what was the last thing you ate? And how does that make you feel? Oh, wow, that sounds amazing. Vietnamese noodle soup. Cheese sandwich, Gouda or Gouda, and mini pretzels. Lovely. Brilliant. So you'll get a variety. This is fantastic. Banana cake. Excellent. Cumin hummus. Lovely. Now feeling hungry. How does it make you feel? Feel hungry. Right. So I would imagine you get a mixture of healthy and unhealthy things, and people might reflect on their diet, on their day. Maybe you want to add follow-up questions to kind of draw students out. Monique, you're starving. Why? When did you last eat? Wow, that was a long time ago. Gosh. And so, you know, we could continue to ask Monique why, but I'm not going to, don't worry. I could also ask, you know, my students to look, is there anything else that people have mentioned that you really like to eat, things like that. So trying to engage the learners and encourage interaction, set the tone. So then once most of the students have arrived, in a face-to-face class, we'd normally start with some sort of relevant warmer. Online is no different, and you can adapt most things that you do face-to-face online. So here we're aiming to engage our learners, to review the vocabulary and and retrieve the vocab from the previous class. So I'm going to ask my students here to choose a word that they learned in the previous lesson, and then they would take turns to define it to the whole class. And then the first student to type the correct word gets a point. And the winning student is the one with the most points. So with the Pearson portal, there are some widgets. There's a little toolbar with widgets, and one of those is a scoreboard. So on the scoreboard, I think you can have up to 8 teams. So if you've got a small class, you could have a team per person. You can change the colors, you can change the names if you want to. Or if you've got a larger class, then you could group students. You could do this, I mean, you could even do it in breakout rooms, but you could do something like instant grouping, like the letters of your name method. So that would be, if I've got, I don't know, 4 groups, I would say, okay, if your first name starts with A to E, you're in team A. If your first name starts with F, so Fred to I don't know, James, then you're in team B, and so on through. So grouping students just in bulk randomly, fine. Anyway, so you could start with something like a vocabulary review and a bit of a competition, reviewing, having the students bring the content. So what do they remember? Having them define it, having them guess. A nice fun way to start a class. Allow any stragglers to join and get students kind of warmed up. So now we're into the lesson proper, the lead-in. So here's the task that we're going to do. You could start by putting a few types of processed food in the chat box. So I guess I'll do that. Ketchup, breakfast, cereal, baked beans, why not? Yeah, there we go. And I might ask, you know, what do these things have in common? And hopefully somebody will tell me that they're all processed, like they're all mixtures of things that go through a process to be produced. Then I might ask for more examples. So David's already added baked beans. Thank you very much. So I'd like my students to give me more examples of processed food, which can be basically anything that's not a raw ingredients. Hot dogs, fabulous. Specific pasta, no, Bitoni. Is that the brand name? Classic German tinned ravioli. Fabulous. Okay, so that is moving on to my next thing. So then I might ask you for examples of famous food brands. So we've had our first one. I'm going to say this wrong again. Buitoni. So what other famous food brands do we know? Heinz, yes. And so on and so on. So in a multilingual class, you could ask students to name one from their country. Probably you've got more monolingual or Swiss students. Actually, I don't know that. That might not be true. So maybe you could give a food type and students have to name as many brands as possible. There's lots of ways to play this one. Mövenpick. Oh, yum. That sounds amazing. Okay, so then question 2, trends. So if you've got a lot of students, you could use breakout rooms and have students discuss in pairs or in small groups. If you do have a multinational class, you could pair up students from different countries to talk about how their countries differ, how trends differ. Or if you think that perhaps the conversation isn't really going terribly fast, you could type some prompts. So you might ask, you know, for each of these areas, so more and more vegan products. Yeah, I think that's certainly true in the UK, yeah. So you could ask what brands are famous, but we've kind of talked about that. Are prices going up or down? Insect protein, golly, that's, wow. I think we've been talking about insect protein for a while, but I haven't realized it's like a happening trend. Yeah, prices. So we could ask, are prices going up or down generally? Are there health issues? Are people becoming more or less healthy in general? What are some typical health problems related to food or diet? Are people eating more or less organic food? Have there been changes in lifestyles? Has this led to more people eating prepared meals or ready meals? Are there more or fewer supermarket chains than there used to be? Is the type of them different? You know, there's lots of questions. So you could ask them lots of prompt questions to kind of generate discussion. If you are using breakout rooms, you know, you'd pop around and monitor, note down anything of interest that you might want to share or have students share when they come back. So that's our lead in. One thing that's worth saying is that I think it really does take longer to run a class online well than face-to-face. So it might be that, a class that you would have run over one session face-to-face, you actually want to break down into 2 online and just take a little bit more time to really kind of get into the topics. Obviously that depends on your syllabus, the time you've got available. You might even prefer to spend a bit more time kind of fully doing a topic and select a few that you think are less critical for your students to allow you to really get the most out of the lessons that you do have. Okay, so moving on to the study phase, the next activity in the course is the video. Now, in a face-to-face situation, you'd probably put this on the big screen or the projector and play it live for the whole class. In an online class, you're going to have to adapt it a little bit. So you can do the same. That's completely viable. You just have to make sure you've made friends with your video conferencing platform first and found that share audio button. Usually it's at the point when you start to share your screen, there's a little button that says share computer audio. I think it took a lot of us a long time to find that. So as long as you click the share audio, that's fine. But I mean, as we know, it takes a lot longer to do things online. You might decide to take a kind of flipped approach, and you might ask students to watch the video before class. In this case, if I was going to do a kind of flipped approach, I would ask my students to watch the video and answer the GIST question and the sentence completion activity that follows before the class. And then in the class, you could use the GIST question here just as a quick recap of the video to remind them of what they watched and also let you see who watched the clip, and you can kind of check which of your students have done their homework. You'll generally find that in the first class, not all students do, but if you don't give time to do it in class, then students will very quickly come having done their homework. If you in those first sort of 2-3 classes say, all right, don't worry, we'll watch it again now for those of you who haven't, you can guarantee that in the next class, nobody will. So I think if you're going to take the approach of a flipped classroom, you have to stick to it and eventually it'll work. So assuming that most students have watched it, you can just quickly go over the answers and then move straight on to the extra activity in the presentation tool. So with Roadmap, there are, on the presentation tool, there are additional activities which aren't in the course book. So you can be sure that they haven't seen this activity and then complete that together as a class. Just to point out that this will be skipping over a couple of activities, the discussion, and moving on to activities. So you'd probably want to then come back to the discussion. So the discussion, this is where you'd want to focus your class time for the video. As I say, you know, watching a video, students can do that in their own time. When they're here with other students, with you, it's, you know, it's focus on conversation, focus on communication. So here we discuss the themes. Again, you can use breakout rooms. It's really helpful to model first. So you probably want to check that they understand all the words, maybe consolidation, inevitable. In question 1, you can refer them back to the answers in the chat box from exercise 1. If you remember, we had asked the students to put in a lot of brand names. So you could say, okay, well, what about these? Would any of these be a good partner for craft? And then you set up the breakout rooms, give them, I don't know, maybe 4 minutes, so 2 minutes per question, something like that. And then get brief feedback from the class after. Again, students are feeding back, what's everybody else doing? So as one pair is reporting, the others could just note in the chat, did they have something similar or different? So that there's a reason to listen to their colleagues. And then we're into the rest of the lessons. So we've got the vocab. So basically, so far, all we've done is this section plus the extra activity. So then we'd have a continuation of the study phase for the vocab. So that's competitions, class sessions, personalization activities. And then in the project here, that's where they would activate what they've learned. And how long you spend on the project really is completely dependent on your time, your preferences. So you could have them do it just quickly in the class, or you could have students work in pairs or small groups out of class and then present back or recap in the next session. So the project is kind of like an elastic band. It can be as long or as short as you want it to be. Whew, right, that was a rattle through. So resources to aid with teaching online. We don't have much time left, especially if people have questions. So just to say, on the portal, there's a huge amount of material available for teachers. A lot of this is also on the My English Lab, and that's where the students will go. So I'd quite like to go to My English Lab and show you it, but I think I'm scared of running out of time because we've got like 10 minutes left. So I think I'm going to stop and ask you if you have any questions. I'm glad you found My English Lab helpful, Rebecca. That's great. I'm going to stop sharing while I pull up the My English Lab, and we can answer any questions now. And if there aren't any, then we can have a quick look at the My English Lab for, the My English Lab for a business partner if you would like to. So please pop any questions in the chat. Otherwise, I will get the mail up and we can have a look. Oh, my link isn't working. That's very annoying. Okay, I don't see any questions, so give me 2 seconds. Copy, link. Now there's people entering the waiting room. Does that mean there's another session coming on, Mary? And actually I should wrap up extremely quickly.
Oh, no, you're fine, Imogen. We start at, what time are we? At 7 o'clock with the next session, and we'll have a break from 6:45 until, I mean, I know you're on a different time level. But
no, that's fine. That makes sense. Brilliant. So there is a quick question here. Do all students have access to My English Lab, or do they pay for the access? That is a very good question. Yes, well, so all students have access to the My English Lab. Let me share my screen and show you. However, there are currently 2 versions of the My English Lab. Now that is going to change, but currently there are 2 versions. Mary might want to.
I'm just going to jump in because with Business Partner, we're on Business Partner, yeah, sorry. Business Partner, your students do get access to the My English Lab and the digital resources, which means the audio and the video. And if this confuses you, it confuses me too and everybody else. But don't worry about it. That's where we have Lena and Mary and Wendy and Jaimo and Pear and everybody to help you out. But that's what the students get automatically free when it comes to Business Partner. The actual interactive workbook, also known as the MEL, that costs money. And that's where, if you're confused at all about which ISBN and which book to get, just contact your, Lena, Mary says me, sorry about talking about myself in the third person. But if you're talking about another book, and that question came from Sarah. So Sarah, hi Sarah, that Speak Out you're probably talking about, and Speak Out would use either the normal version where you get the audio and video, which is on the Pearson English portal, and the MyLab would be extra. Does that answer your question, Sarah? Great. Okay, back to you, Imogen.
So I was just going to really quickly show you what you get. So first of all, let's look at the difference between the student and the teacher view. So this is the student view. You've got the audio, the video. There's additional grammar practice. So the 5th or the final lesson in each unit has a kind of optional extra grammar area in it. So it's not in the course book, but there's a kind of connection or a hook to an extra grammar practice. So all of the things that we would consider really essential are in the course book for grammar. So that's the first grammar point for each unit. And then there's either things that are either a revision of things that they probably know, or things that they can kind of live without, but they might want to review. Then they're in the second one, excuse me, and all of the content for that is in the MEL. So they have a little, it actually comes from my grammar lab. So they've got a little video introduction and then lots of practice on these. So that's there. Then there's pronunciation practice. Again, there's an explanation. I didn't share my audio, so there's no point in me doing that. And there's an explanation of the grammar and the prawn, and then some practice. It's a quick question here. Does a teacher need to have the teacher's book to function efficiently? Normally, I don't need it. No, probably not.
Now, you do need to have the online teacher's access, though, in order for this to work. Yeah.
Just what I was going to say. Yeah, because if you have the online, then you've got pretty much everything. So this is the teacher's view that I'm on now. You'll see that it's nearly the same. The differences are the teacher's resources, where you've got yet more extra practice, the photocopyables, answer keys, just loads of additional stuff, plus the tests. And this is where for the teacher, my self-assessment is. So students have a self-assessment for every A2 plus, yeah, that's coming very shortly. The students have a self-assessment for every lesson, where they just have the opportunity to reflect on how well they can do. And then the other thing that the teacher has, of course, is the tests. There's another question gone there. There's also mail-only access, which students already have the book. Yes, that's right. Yep. Online access is obtainable separately from the book. Yes, it is. Glad to hear it, Kim. Loads of extra practice. That's what we want to say. Finally, before I finish, the last thing I want to show you is the region-specific material, which the students and the teachers have access to. So these are additional videos with an angle for something that we should have said Dachel, should we? Because we've missed out Liechtenstein if we don't. But so with something that's specific to the region. So looking at a business in Germany or Austria or Switzerland. I have to say, I don't know if there are any Liechtenstein businesses featured.
There is one.
Ah, there we go.
There is actually, and their biggest export is fake teeth.
What?
Yes, it's in Business Partner. I can't remember where, but it's there.
Wow. Well, I have not watched that one. That is phenomenal. Yeah. So your region has this exclusive content, which has additional videos, sort of a couple per level, and obviously you get the script and additional worksheets and things with that. So there's worksheets to go with the excuse me, the video. So extra worksheets per region and extra videos. Good. I think I'm going to see if there's a fake teeth or dentures. Wow, who knew? Okay, that's fabulous. I think we've answered all of these questions. So if anybody has any more questions, now is the time. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much for having me, for your attention. And if you have any other questions, then Mary or Wendy or Pierre or Heimo or Lena will forward them on to me, I'm sure. So thank you very, very much. And I'll pass you back to Mary.
Oh, great, Imogen. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate that you joined us. And what I didn't get a chance to say at the beginning of our session, because I just love saying it, is Imogen gets to hang out at the beach where Imogen is.
Oh, not anymore. No. Not anymore. I'm back in London. Yeah.
Oh, no.
I was locked in Scotland by the beach, but now I'm back in London. So yeah, it's all city life again.
Oh, wow. And your necklace is absolutely fabulous. I've been just focused on that the whole time. Thank
you very much.
Really cool. It's really fascinating. So thank you so much, Imogen, for spending time with us today, and have a lovely evening. And then for the rest of you who are staying with us, who are joining us, we are going to have a tiny little break now. Well, it'll be about until 7 o'clock. And we're all in the same time zone, I believe now. And then we will be starting off with our final session of our marathon today, and that will be with Joe Hunter, our amazing editor of Formula, which is one of the most incredible concepts for English language teaching exams titles. I've been teaching exams since back in 1987 when I started. So really stay with us for that, and you'll see one of the coolest concepts ever. Until 7 o'clock, have a little break, and we'll see you soon.